All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Tennis Channel Inside In on the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Mitch Michals from the Santa Monica studios. Post Wimbledon, a lot to talk about the all-time action at the All England Club this year. Special guest on the show, first time joining the podcast. Tennis has no shortage of broadcasters that are exceptional. This guy might be the most, dare I say, enthusiastic in all of the sport, coming up on close to 20 years in the broadcast booth. A tremendous asset to the tennis community. You can catch him on a lot of different platforms. He covered Wimbledon on the radio this past year. You'll see him on Tennis TV and a lot of other hosts of channels. Robbie Koenig, welcome to the show. Really looking forward to chatting with you.
Hey, thanks, Mitch. Thanks for that awesome introduction. I haven't worked a day in my life. I'll be honest. I love my playing career, and I was so blessed to get into the broadcasting business as well. Actually, courtesy of Jason Goodall.
Yeah.
Jason to thank for that. But yeah, I love what I do, and to be calling some of these matches at Wimby this year, even though it was for radio this time, it's my one gig a year where I do radio. It's so much fun, man, to be at the All England Club in the middle of the summer, had some decent weather. Doesn't get much better than that.
No, it doesn't. And I'm glad you mentioned Jason Goodall. I've had the chance to talk to him a few times in the last couple of years. You two specifically, for someone in my age demographic in the United States, that's how we kind of discovered you, was through the world feed with Jason Goodall and some of those epic matchups that he really, and I think that's one of the things I want to get into before we get to Wimbledon, is that there's so much tennis that goes on all around the world and all different times of the year that you can kind of just forget about the non-slam, non-major events. But your broadcast team with Jason, other tournaments you've covered, it really is a global game. And the fact that there's just so much tennis to offer really does stand out about the sport.
It's so true, especially these days, so much. When Jason and I were early days of the world feed, ATP media, it was only the Masters 1000s. And then it was a couple of the 500s. Now it's Masters 1000s, 500s, and most of the 250s now get put up. And of course, one of the big beneficiaries of that are the betting companies, because they have so much more content.
Yeah.
Of course, the tennis networks now, like Tennis Channel, they've got content literally every week, multiple tournaments going on, and then, so much revenue to be made off the back of that advertising for you guys. The betting sites have got plenty of content too. So, if you're a tennis fan, everyone's a winner, man.
Yeah, we certainly are. There's no shortage of good content, good matches. And your career, just wanted to touch on a few things. What was that transition like? Your playing career, you had the doubles runs where you made some US Open runs there and had a successful playing career. But what was the transition like when you go, I want to stay involved in the sport? You mentioned Jason Goodall and you transitioned to broadcasting. How was it like to go from playing to behind the microphone? And what was that adjustment period like?
The adjustment period was a year, because I coached Wesley Moody and Mahesh Bapati in 2006. But halfway through the year, Wesley had enough of me. And at Wimbledon, he said, listen, I don't want to work with you anymore. Mahesh wanted to carry on. And it was like, whoa, just like that, the guys want to work with me. And so, it was a real jolt as far as the coaching world was concerned. And actually, prior to that happening at Wimbledon, I bumped into Jason and he was like, what are you doing? I hadn't seen him in a while. And I said, no, I'm coaching. I said, what are you doing? He goes, I'm doing, ATP Media World Feed. Never heard of it. It was still in its infancy. Yeah. He's like, would you ever get into commentating? And I was like, no, I love this coaching gig right now. It's the next best thing to playing. Only to lose half of my job in July. And, I went back, not directly to Jason, but the head of production at the time. And I kind of nailed things down in the summer, right before the US Open. I'd commentated. I was coaching in Cincinnati in Canada, and I'd done bits and pieces of sets here and there when I was finishing my coaching responsibilities, and I'd go and hang out with Jason in the booth, and we just talk tennis. And the guys from ATP Media at the time, Dom Gresse and Steve Plasto, they said, hey, Robbie, we love you as a commentator. Is it something you consider doing next year? And it was such an easy decision because, like I said, I just lost half my job. They were offering me, all 9 Masters 1000s, traveling on site, and, stable income. I knew when I was flying. I knew when I was coming home. Oh. And that's how it all started, Mitch.
Wow, it's interesting too. I mean, all you need is that opportunity and that spark to set it, and here we are. A couple decades later, still going strong.
I have yesterday.
Yeah, it seems like I had to I have to also bring this up because I mentioned the enthusiasm, and your wordplay is kind of the stuff of legends. So I want to know where that came from and how that comes out of you in big matches. Some of the phrasing, some of the exciting wordsmith wordplay that you use to describe some of this scintillating action.
Yeah, so I worked quite hard on that. When social media first started coming out, and it started to play a bigger role in tennis, and I'd go back and listen to cuts of points that were played. And of course, generally it's the highlights of what's going on in a match. And I found that I was often using the same adjectives to describe unbelievable points. And it was just basically very repetitive. And it wasn't that, what's the word I'm looking for? Not innovative, but it wasn't enough mix of a description.
Sport variety or something.
Variety. Yeah. It's not enough variety. And sport by nature is repetitive, especially our sport. There's only so many ways. You think you can describe a forehand cross-court winner, or forehand down the line winner, and you don't want to say the obvious. Oh, it's an unbelievable forehand down the line winner, because everybody can see that at home, right?
Yeah.
So when that started to happen in social media, and I found I was saying, oh, that's an unbelievable shot. That's an unbelievable shot. That's an unbelievable shot. But those shots in real time have happened 10 or 15 minutes apart. Then I realized I was just using the same adjectives all the time. And I said, listen, I have to be better than this. And how I started was I just, I'd go to the thesaurus and just look up unbelievable and see the different ways of the synonyms for unbelievable, jaw dropping, redlining, whatever it might be. So then I literally started to make notes to improve my vocabulary so that my presentation and content could be better. Mm-hmm. And then that have just evolved over time, right? And then, you read something good in a sports book or a phrase that I listened to somebody on basketball using. I like the phrase, but that's very basketball specific. How can I use that in a tennis term, So I would start to really work on my language and get better in that department, because ultimately I'm in the speaking game, right?
Yeah.
Speaking and analysis game. So, that's where I wanted to be. And naturally, I'm an enthusiastic guy. So when somebody does hit an unbelievable shot, I don't want to be saying, oh, that's an unbelievable forehand down the line, right? Because has someone at home thinking, Robbie's hardly got up for that. The guy's just like an absolute screamer. And is he watching the same match as me? I'm a sports fan like everybody else, right? I get excited naturally. I'm naturally an enthusiastic guy. So, but also the discipline when you get a nice word or phrase, and this is something I used to do in the early days, you just crowbar it in there because you think, hey, it's such a nice phrase, I must use it. And then you realize, oh, shit, man, it wasn't the right time, it wasn't the right place, and it wasn't the right player. And then some phrases, I try and keep specifically for a player that just suits that certain player. And then sometimes, you'd wait a whole tournament and you wouldn't get to use it because he would lose early. And then I got to wait another 2 weeks because he's not playing. Yeah. And that would frustrate me. But the pleasure it would give me when I picked the right moment to describe an unbelievable shot or rally or something that happens in a match was the skill that I started to develop. Just the patience, just be patient, right?
Yeah. Well, hey, that's a great lesson to the kids out there, right? Read more and then just pick up more words, and it'll help you in, a lot of different fields, tennis being one of them. But no, the personality bubbling to the surface too. We all see that. And some broadcasters might get mad at me, but I feel like you were the first person to, start coining the maestro term for Federer. I don't know if it was before you with some of the verbiage with him and how graceful he was out there.
Yeah. The one that I used was monogrammed maestro with the RF logo, because that was the hot thing at the time, right?
Yeah.
So, if it was the first time you heard it used, I don't know if it was me or not, but definitely the monogram. I chucked that in there with the word maestro. And again, it fitted Roger so well. I think it did anyway. Everybody was obsessed with the RF logo for so long.
Yeah.
I thought, that's a nice one to use.
Well, getting to the event at hand, the event that just completed, the Wimbledon Championships, the men's side with an unbelievable final, to steal a generic term there, but I think it lived up to it in this regard. Carlos Alcaraz dethrones Novak Djokovic, who had won the previous 4 editions of the Wimbledon tournament. First player outside the Big Four to win Wimbledon since 2002, Robbie. And he did it in remarkable fashion. Yeah, that's a stat in and of itself. But what I want to get your thoughts on in this match is the first thing that stands out to me was this match was great. You know, there was drama. The level had moments where it was super high. There was conditions, there was nerves, there's everything. But in a 5-set match, this kid, this Spanish kid, Carlos Alcaraz, outplayed the very most accomplished player in the sport down the stretch. That was jaw-dropping, even for somebody with all the accolades and all the hype that Alcaraz has, Robbie. He outperformed Djokovic in a 5th set of a major final. It's just insane to me.
Yeah, I'm just having a look at some of the numbers in that 5th set. The winners to unforced errors for Alcaraz on the IBM. I cross-referenced it with my boys at Hawkeye just to get an idea. And that was similar. They weren't identical. 18 winners, 5 unforced errors in that 5th set. Jocko was 3 winners, 3 unforced errors. So the level from Alcaraz in the 5th was phenomenal. Phenomenal. Especially considering that he lost the 4th, right?
Yeah.
For me, it wasn't an absolute classic because I thought the 1st and 3rd sets I've got high standards. I'm not going to drop my standards just because it was 5 sets and it was a final. I've seen better 5 sets at majors. It was a very good match. I thought the 1st set was one-sided. I thought Alcaraz was bang average. The 2nd set was highly entertaining. And I think the number one thing that stands out for me in that whole match is how poorly Djokovic played at the tail end of that 2nd set tiebreaker. The 2 unforced errors on the backhand on set point, and then to give set points on his own set point, the backhand that he missed, and then the very next point, the unforced error on the backhand, was mortifying. I couldn't believe it. It made those kind of mistakes. And obviously the backhand return on set point from Alcaraz was an absolute beaut.
Yeah.
Backhand winner down the line. But for me, the whole match rests in that moment right there. Djokovic goes up 2-0. I don't think Alcaraz comes back to win. He might win a set, but I don't think he wins. I don't think he wins his first Wimbledon. But to navigate that period as well as he did, and of course that long game in the early stages of the 3rd set was quite extraordinary for a young man. But for me, what this gives to Alcaraz from a mental perspective after what happened at the French Open, that is almost immeasurable for me, Mitch.
Yeah, and I'm with you in the sense that there were moments where I wouldn't put this match at the level of some of the all-time greats in terms of the level. It's just how now Alcaraz, as you said, it navigated moments of pressure where so many guys blink, and it's understandable because of who you're playing and someone that's been there before. There were uncharacteristic errors by Djokovic, and that's the cruel nature of this beautiful sport, Robbie, is that in a 5-hour match, a couple mistakes here or there could be the difference. And it's how it is. We wouldn't have it any other way. But for a player like Djokovic, the break point that he missed on that swinging overhead that might have gone out was another one where who knows what happens.
That's right. I forgot about that early stages of the 5th to go up 2-love, wasn't it? I think it was to go up 2-love. But these days, these kind of matches, like literally balance on the width of an atom, right? It's so competitive, our sport. But I think Novak summed it up beautifully after the match, Mitch, when for the first time I've heard him speak about Alcaraz in really glowing terms. It's like, okay, I've had a feel of this guy now a couple of times, and I'm really impressed. He is such a complete player, and he made that reference to the fact that he has a bit of Roger in him, a bit of Rafa in him, and he sees a little bit of himself as well in him. And that's high praise. Djokovic. And this is what I like about Djokovic. He doesn't just dish out that kind of praise. He didn't dish it out the first time he lost to him, right?
Yeah, you have to earn it.
Absolutely. He reserved his judgment, didn't he?
You definitely have to earn it. And the other stat I just wanted to mention, Djokovic only 2 aces in the final, was averaging about 11 coming into this. So that's another great job with the Alcaraz return. You put it on your Twitter feed too, and I think it was summed up pretty good. Alcaraz and what he does, and Djokovic has this in him too, but what Alcaraz brings is that one more ball in play theory, where he just gets everything, and he's going to produce more errors because you're not used to hitting that many shots.
Yeah, and it's also the effect that the psychological effect of his movement. It's like, I have to hit the ball closer to the line. That point should have been over then. So the next smash, I have to hit a little bit harder and a little bit closer. And of course, that's when you end up making errors. But his movement, you couple unbelievable movement. I call it nuclear athleticism. That's what he's got. You couple that with good anticipation, and you're going to have a guy like Djokovic that is just so difficult to put away. And, I think in the years going forward, to beat a guy like Alcaraz, you're going to have to be able to finish at the net because he just moves too well. And,
right.
and I think a lot of the youngsters have realized that. Holger Rune comes in a lot. Yannick Sinner comes in a lot. For me, one of the best matches in the year, in the last year, has been that Sinner Alcaraz quarterfinal. Open. You talk about high intensity for 5 hours. Every single set of tennis was ridiculous.
Yeah,
that level was, for me, insane.
It certainly was. It certainly was. I look at it, and I look at Alcaraz, the whole body of work already at 20 with 2 major titles, the number one, everything that he's done. He just built to handle this. Like everyone, like kids today now say, oh, someone's built different. He really is, in the sense that he's built to handle the weight of these big matches, these big moments, and the responsibility that it comes with being the next guy after this iconic era.
But how's this guy's mentality on the court? I have never seen somebody who has such relaxed concentration. Most of the players, I mean, maybe Roger's probably similar in that department, but most guys have intense concentration. I call it relaxed concentration. The fact that he plays with a smile, he shoots his racket at his box as if to say, okay, watch this now. And that is such a great skill to have. Being able to concentrate for long periods of time is taxing. But I think he's got this formula, Mitch, that allows him to concentrate easy, which is a massive advantage.
He's smiling like after winners, like, I did that. That was me.
Yeah, brilliant, right?
More with Robbie Koenig here on Tennis Channel Inside In. The veteran broadcaster joins the podcast. A lot was made about this win for Alcaraz as a passing of the torch moment. And I don't want to, nay that idea in theory, because Alcaraz is a winner. He's going to keep winning. I'm not going to doubt that at all. But I just also want to point out, Robbie, I don't think that Novak's done winning. I think we got a couple of years left, and it's great to have a rivalry of sorts, but I don't think this is a true, that's it for Novak. He's done, not in the slightest.
No, not in the slightest. A couple of the commentators that I was listening to here were talking about the Federer-Sampras match. It's similar to that. It's not similar at all. Djokovic has just won 2 majors this year, by the way. Yeah. And Alcaraz has just and only just sneaked out this one. And I think this is the first year where Novak is being able to play the schedule that he wants to play, be able to come back and play. In fact, he hasn't. He wasn't allowed to play in the States this year. So his preparation hasn't been ideal yet. Mm-hmm. He'll only be allowed to play in the States now in the events leading up to the US Open for the very first time. So he's had such a disrupted last couple of years that, if he's going to be in full flow and play the schedule he wants for the next 3 or 4 years, he's going to be challenging at the sharp end. I mean, look how easily he cruised through the draw at Wimbledon. But it's definitely no passing of the torch. I don't even think it's remotely comparable to the Sampras-Federer match that everybody was talking about. Federer another 2 years to win a major, right? Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
So
that's a good way to put it, in the sense that Alcaraz is going to be a threat and as a co-favorite or favorite in a lot of these tournaments. But the idea that Djokovic is still just, if he's getting into his post prime, he did win 2 majors this year, he's still going to be the top 2 or 3, favorite at these events. That leads me to my next question, Robbie. I mean, I'm looking at the field, and not just this year, but beyond. Djokovic obviously still there, but how do you see Alcaraz's rivals, or lack thereof? What's the landscape look like for who can challenge this guy going forward?
Well, let me start with my number one disappointment at Wimbledon was Sebi Korda. I had high hopes for him. I think this will be a knock mentally for Sebi, because he was talking himself up at Queen's about how he feels he's a contender to win Wimbledon this year. So I think from a psychological point of view, he's going to have to improve, get better. I think Sebi's the kind of guy who's better in the big matches almost. It's navigating those early rounds, and where the burden of expectation is on him to win rather than being the challenger. I think that's what he still has to get used to. That pressure of having to win is something we take for granted. It's only when the target's on your back on a regular basis that you get used to it. And Sebi hasn't had that. So I was very disappointed with him, but he will be one of those guys that I think will challenge Alcaraz. He's definitely got the game at times right now. Holger Rune, I think he's got a big time mentality. He's going to be there and thereabouts. I've mentioned Yannick Sinner. I think under the tutelage of Darren, he's made some fine tunings to his serve as well. Again, I noticed post French Open, I think he's going to be there and thereabouts. And I think on certain surfaces, I think Musetti on clay could give him a tough time at the French. I'd like to see a little bit more from Lorenzo. But as far as the young guns, those are the ones that spring to mind. I think Francis Tiafoe on his day, as he showed us at the US Open. From an American standpoint, I think Francis is going to be knocking on the door. Probably I'd have him in the category just behind Sinner and Rune. Probably if there's other Americans that I was thinking of, like Tommy Paul's playing some of the best tennis of his career. I think he's growing in confidence and believes that he belongs in the top 10. And I think a good run in the summer, Tommy might be there. So those are the guys that just spring to mind. I don't know if I'm leaving anybody out. Is anybody that
the only one I would add, and that's a great list, would be maybe Fritz if he's served well and he comes to the way he plays, like you outlined, what it's going to take get to the net. If Fritz's serve is going, the court's fast, I think he could be one. But look, it's going to be a tough task, and I'm also glad you brought up how it could be surface specific. We could be getting to where Alcaraz transcends all surfaces, but a lot of these players, it might go back to the pre-Big Three, Big Four era where we've got some surface specific results here.
Yeah, and Musetti really stands out. I know they played some matches as juniors, and I remember seeing Lorenzo first before I saw Carlos Alcaraz, and it was actually a young kid that my son, who's at Baylor University, he was practicing with this kid, and he goes, no, Musetti's good, but there's other kid I was practicing with in Spain called Carlos Alcaraz. He's better. And I said, what are you talking about? Musetti's like unbelievable, man. He's already made third or fourth round in Rome. He says, no, I'm telling you, this other kid's better. And I said, no way. And of course, he was spot on.
You saw that clip that came out on Twitter, that photo where he practiced with Fed before the 2019 quarterfinal at Wimbledon, and Ferrero was like, hit it hard, Roger. He can handle it. And then here we are 4 years later.
Isn't it just brilliant?
Hey, props to Juan Carlos Ferrero, too, for the work he's done. Former number one, former major champion, and someone that doesn't, for lack of a better term, doesn't need to be in the coaching world, found someone special. And the work they've put in, I go back to consistency, Robbie. Like all these guys that are making leaps, just about all of them, have had that consistent relationship with their coaching and their team. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
You're spot on, Mitch. Spot on. And I think it's so important these days to have that consistency and trust. Trust is the number one thing. And I think the people that he's got around him, the guy who actually discovered him, put them in touch was his agent, Molina. I'm trying to think of his first name now. Not Enric Molina, who's the chair, but Albert Molina. He saw him when he was 13. And, I think the other person that we mustn't forget is his father, who would have done a lot of the coaching in the early years, right? And he created such a robust player at 14 years of age, right? There was so much there. And then Albert Molina said to Juan Carlos, and the timing was perfect because that's just when Juan Carlos had split up with Zverev.
Yes.
And I remember Alex Corretja told me the story, and he asked him, he says, like, what are you going to do now? He says, I found this kid. He's 14. I've seen him play, and he's good, and he's going to be my next project.
Wow.
I've got somebody in the infancy, and I can mold and shape them the way I want, but there's stuff there that this kid's doing that no other kid his age does. And Alex relayed the story to me. He's always my go-to. He's my Spanish go-to.
Okay.
He's always, he obviously commentates for Spanish TV, and he's a wealth of knowledge of Alex. And so it's been a great partnership. It must be tough. I'm a tennis parent as well, that you create the son of yours who you love so much and you give so much time and effort. And then, they go on and somebody else becomes the man who's coaching them. And I would listen, Mitch, if I saw him embrace Juan Carlos like he did, he's crying, he's loving and hugging. I'm like, what about me? I'm your dad, right?
Yeah, come on, show me some love.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of being a great tennis parent. I mean, you have the pro high level pedigree experience, but for parents that don't, and you can draw your inferences to who else is out there, men in the women's game. But sometimes the best decision you can make is, okay, I've taken you as far as I can. Now we got to go to somebody else to really unlock that secret stuff. But it's special to see. So again, props to Carlos Alcaraz, Wimbledon champ. It was a phenomenal performance. The world #1 keeps it going at age 20. Robbie Koenig now here on Tennis Channel Insight. And I wanted to get your thoughts on the women's final. It was an interesting one. It was an unfortunate letdown in the performance of Ons Jabeur, who gets back to the final. But starting from the other side, Robbie, Marketa Vondrousova, Wimbledon champion, the unseeded player. That hadn't happened, just an unseeded player getting that far in a couple of decades. But she had 2 grass wins at her pro career at the start of this year's season. And now she's a Wimbledon champ.
I mean, Alcaraz didn't have that many more at the start of this grass court. I think he'd won a couple of matches at Wimbledon. That was about it. It's but it just shows you, the cream always rises to the top. A lot of people forgot that she was a French Open finalist as well. So let's not forget that she'd been deep in a major. And I'm just wondering if the expectations were pretty low for her coming in. And sometimes that's such a powerful position to be in, right? You don't expect too much, but it just shows you the importance of handling nerves in big situations. We so often talk about the game and we make reference to how great someone's serve or forehand or backhand is. But when you get into the biggest moments and the biggest matches, it's what's between your ears. That's the glue that keeps the game together. And Vondrousova, she's just got, we were talking about Alcaraz, what a great personality he has on court. She is very similar. She looks so relaxed mentally on the tennis court. She looks like she's playing with a lot of mental freedom. And, that is invaluable, man. It's invaluable. And you can see the flip side of that when you don't have that. And that we saw that glaringly obvious at 4-2 in the opening set for Jabeur. I think she won 2 more points after that.
Mm-hmm.
It was up 4-2. I think it was 2 points. She won the rest of the set.
Yeah, Vondrousova, and people forgot that silver medal run at the Olympics a couple of years ago, which she beat some pretty talented players to get there. So it's not a complete fluke. And we've talked about the depth of the WTA. There's a lot of players in that mid-level. Like the mid-level's never been stronger. The top maybe has a little dip, but the Ons Jabeur thing, and I just wanted to, get your thoughts clearly on it. Do you think that was predominantly, if not all, mental fatigue and the weight of expectations, nerves? Were there any physical? Because she did, and I bring this up because she did run the gauntlet to get to the final with Kvitova, Rybakina, and then obviously Sabalenka. But do you think it was more, if not all, mental nerves?
Yeah, no, definitely. Given how well she played in the opening 6 games, I think if somebody had started the match poorly and, she was down 4-1, double break in no time, then I think it's much easier to draw the conclusion of what you're suggesting, that fatigue has set in and she's just tired. I think it's easier. But, when you get off to such a good start, you're buoyed, you're feeling great, you're up a break, you're playing well. She wasn't like, it wasn't like Vondrousova was playing badly. She was playing well. She was outsmarting her. And then, obviously, she could see that checkered flag there in the distance there, the opening set, well within her grasp. And then you start thinking, well, one set away from being, a set up at Wimbledon final, and suddenly all those thoughts start to rush, and the ability to stay in the moment, I think, was probably lost right there. You make one or two bad shot selections, and it's amazing how your mind has this innate ability just to focus on the negative. One bad mistake outweighs 10 good shots that you've hit prior.
Yeah. You're the only one out there too. This is tennis. So you're just out by yourself. Everyone's looking at you. And, look, the weight of expectation on her being where she's from and the door she's breaking, it's huge. We've discussed it. Also the psychological factor too, Robbie, of, she was, I'm pretty sure, the underdog in all the matches I mentioned. Now you come into a final where you're the favorite, you're expected to win. That flips the psyche completely on its head.
Absolutely. Right. And we mentioned that about Sebi Korda as well. Early on, losing to somebody that he should have beaten. Everybody's talking him up as the guy's going to go deep in the tournament. Unless you have been in that situation, it's very difficult to describe to, just an average tennis player or tennis fan. And it's one of the reasons why I get so annoyed when juniors only want to play up. They only want to play better players, because that's so easy. It's so easy. If you lose, you've got the excuse, oh, well, they're older than me. And that's why I always say to coaches, at least a couple of times a week, make sure he's playing against somebody that he should beat, and make sure he drums them when he beats them. And doesn't have, just a weak mind. You go out there and you learn to be the favorite, the front runner. And I think that can be learned from a young age. I'm not saying that's the case for somebody like Ons, but the theory behind it is exactly the same.
One of my favorite people in tennis who have gotten to know out here, Jimmy Arias, said the exact same.
I love that guy, man.
He put it perfectly on the tennis.com podcast over here. And he just said, well, losing's a habit, but winning is too. And you have to, not protect your UTR, whatever the metric is, but you've got to put something on the line. So when you play someone your age, you're expected to win, and then you got to perform. So I'm in lockstep with you guys there. Gutting to see On, so sad. I hope that she can rebound and, get back on track. She's such a bubbling personality for the sport. So, we wish her, the best going forward too. 7 though, Robbie, 7 different Wimbledon champions in a row, 6 in a row that were first time champs. So that's where we are with the women's draw at Wimbledon.
Yeah. And, the margins are just getting finer and finer in the sport. I think, as close as the men's game is, I think the margins are even finer in the women's game. And I think, it's testimony to the fact that we've had so many different winners in the last 7 years. And man, what about the Czech Republic as a, Czech Republic?
Another lefty Czech.
Czechia.
Yeah.
Got to get that right. It's called Czechia now. So excuse me to our Czech friends out there. Czechia. I mean, it's just a production line. I went back to see where it all started, and just having a look at the major winners, it started with Marketa and Navratilova. They were the ones who really did set the ball rolling. And, of course, Martina works for Tennis Channel, and probably my favorite GOAT. She's my GOAT. Martina. I've always had a soft spot for Martina. Ever since her rivalry with Chrissy was what I grew up with.
If we're talking, Wimbledon, her versus Serena, it's pretty close. Like that's one where, surface specific, right? Like what Martina did at that tournament, at the background you have on your Zoom chat here, she was, and doubles too. Like there's, what she's done there will never probably be seen again.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great Martina stats, but my favorite one of all, and will be that she has won the doubles at every major at least 7 times.
Yeah.
What? That's
right?
At least 7, some more. But just getting back, she got the ball rolling, obviously being from Czechia and Manlakova, and then they just started to come after that, right? There were just so many. And they've been a powerhouse in Fed Cup, Billie Jean King Cup now. And yeah, I'm just fascinated. I always pick the brains of my Czech friends and those who are still involved in Czech tennis. And, I don't know if there's a specific formula. It's a bit of everything. Some psycho parents, some great coaches. Great coaching seems to come up a lot.
Yeah.
I think technically they're very good. They build a very robust player. And it seems like the club tennis system there is so vibrant.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the nice contrast of clay outdoors in the summer and slightly quicker indoors during the cooler months. So you get that, very different stroke making that you have to produce, and very central in Europe. So it's easy to drive everywhere and, play in Germany or Spain or wherever else, Switzerland. So I think, geographically that works well. And they're not the biggest country in the world. I think 10 million population I read. And I made the comparison on Twitter to, and I use the word culture, and I think it's important. Their tennis culture is so strong. And I compared it to the All Blacks. I don't know if you follow rugby, but the New Zealand All Blacks.
Mm-hmm.
New Zealand's a country of 5 million people, but their rugby culture is just, they're rugby crazy. And they have dominated the sport since the 80s. Yeah. They are the winningest international team in all of sport. And they've got 5 million population, right? Yeah. I mean, because their rugby culture is so strong from the top end right through, all the school levels. And they're able to beat everybody because their culture is so good. And I think it's the same for for Czech tennis, and especially strong on the women's side.
Yeah, we'll see if the men's, Yuri Lehecka's coming up. He's looked like he's got a promising game, but yeah, the women, it's insane stuff. Robbie, before we wind this down, I did want to get your thoughts on another thing, because I get some of my research notes from Twitter and the exchanges that go on here. And a couple weeks ago on this show, I had a great writer for Tennis Now, Chris Otto, the fan child on Twitter, on here, and the topic of Coco Gauff's forehand came up, which unfortunately has been letting her down. And I just wanted to pick your brain about the topic and the exchange you had regarding how tough it is to make, drastic changes to restructure a weapon, a tool in a tennis tool bag at any point in your career, let alone at the pro level. And your belief that a lot of it, maybe in Coco's case, maybe in general, is between the ears and it's the mindset. If we could just kind of expand on that. Her forehand obviously is the weak link in an otherwise all worldly game.
Yeah. So if you have a look at the grip, it's not too dissimilar to the best player in women's tennis at the moment, Iga Swiatek. But I think the one thing I would do is I just shorten the swing.
Mm-hmm.
I personally wouldn't go about changing the grip. I think the mind memory, and I like to use it mind memory because it's the mind that, it's not muscle memory, it's mind memory. There are so many reps that have already gone into it. I think it's very difficult. And it's not like she's a bad player, right? Top 10 in the world.
Yeah.
So let's get that straight. But I think shorten the swing, which I think is easier to do. And she's got to be very aggressive with that shot. She's got to learn to dominate with the shot, because for me, that's the difference between her and Swiatek. If the ball comes down the middle of the court, Swiatek is looking to jump around and dominate with the forehand. Whereas the mindset of Coco would be to step inside the forehand occasionally. And I noticed that in big moments against Kenin, step inside and hit the backhand. That would be her preferred shot. So, and Kenin said it right afterwards. As soon as the pressure's on, I'm going straight to the forehand. So I think if Coco can just do those two things, just fine tune the size of the swing, keep it a lot more compact, she's got the power. If you can just add a bit more control to it, I think that would go a big way to helping her. And then her mindset of being ultra positive with that shot. And, that central ball comes in the middle of the court. Yeah. She's got to be brave enough to step around and crank a forehand either inside out or inside in or hard up the middle. But as long as she's still stepping inside forehands to hit backhands, I think I'll still have questions about how much she trusts that shot and how much she wants to dominate with that shot.
That's why I go to you guys, the experts, because everyone can see a problem, but I want to know the ins and outs of what goes into it. And something else you said that I had to think about, but I would agree with, Djokovic's serve might have been the biggest change, retooling that we've seen. But as you pointed out, that's the one shot where you have complete control over.
And that's the difficulty when you're changing a ground stroke. If you were going to do a complete overhaul with a grip change. And when I say complete overhaul, any change is a complete overhaul. It feels, if you're moving at a millimeter to the pros, it feels like a major change, right? So let me get that straight. But the moment movement's involved, it just complicates things even further. So when you're talking about changing a grip on a forehand, your contact point is so often, it's a couple of millimeters. It's there. It's always changing. That's my point. It's always changing. So to get it right is so difficult. You have to spend thousands of hours making it feel comfortable. And I'm not sure she needs that much of an overhaul. I think just shortening it, keeping it nice and compact, and being really aggressive with her swing, that would be my solution. If Robbie Koenig was asked to be the coach for the next year, too soon to panic.
Definitely too soon to panic. Wrapping things up here with Robbie Koenig here on Tennis Channel Inside In. A blast talking tennis, talking Wimbledon with you. Pointing out about this time of year too, it's the transition period. There's events on all these different surfaces. We got the Newport Hall of Fame Open in Rhode Island here in the States. There's some clay court events going on right now. Hard court's on the way. I bring all that up, Robbie, to say that this is when players can still find their footing, or trying to find their footing, to salvage a good year and really have a good hard court season. So I think while this week might not be the most consequential in terms of results, it's pretty important to just clear off the slate after Wimbledon, hit the ground running, because as we know, the Open will be here before you know it.
Yeah, I mean, the top 10 or 15 players in the world, they've probably had a good Wimbledon, and they're getting some well-deserved time off. But for a lot of players, the rest of the field, those guys between say 20 and 100, they probably haven't won as many matches. Good chance to get some good wins under your belt. You've got some of the 250s on clay now. You've got another grass court tournament if that's your preferred surface. Hey, shout out to Kevin Anderson who's coming back in Newport.
Yeah.
Gotta get that one in there. Yeah. So, you can tee yourself up. My point is, you can tee yourself up nicely before the hard courts come around in the US with some good match wins. A couple of quarterfinals at these 250s on clay. Infuse yourself with a bit of confidence, get some match wins, and then you hit the ground running on the hard courts. So, I'm just thinking off the top of my head how Casper Ruud a couple of years ago used this time of the year to really tee himself up in his career, right? Winning all 3 of the clay court tournaments. So I think if you've got the right mindset, it's a good chance to capitalize now.
You get the Americans too that have spent, 3 months overseas. So I think they're just happy to be home, and that might have something to do with how positive their game go. We hear a lot of it now with social media being a thing. They're telling us out loud, like, man, this is a long trip across the pond, but they're happy to be back. And I do want one of the names we forgot to mention, just hardcore season, can't not bring up Danny Medvedev, because I think he's going to be in the thick of things for all of these hardcore events all the way through the Open.
Yeah, and especially the fact that he's won so many matches, on the clay, on the grass. So, I think he's won enough. He's going to be primed and ready. He's like, hell, guys, if I can compete with you on the clay and the grass as well as I have, just wait. He's giving one of these ones, isn't he? He's like, you guys, just wait. Just wait.
Well, I want to end with this. You've been very gracious with your time. We know about the broadcasting career. We know about the playing career. How has it been being a tennis parent? You got your son Luke at Baylor, now getting into the college game. Did you know much about college tennis before Luke was on the radar at some of these college programs?
A little bit, not a lot. I'd say on a scale of 1 to 10, I probably was about a 2.7.
Okay.
So not a lot, but it's been amazing. The coaches at Baylor have been amazing. It's a phenomenal school. We feel very blessed that he's there, first of all. But I could not believe the depth when I did some of the recruiting trips last year. I was blown away. We went to watch a couple of matches. Kentucky was also after him. We watched a couple of matches there. We saw Baylor play a couple of matches, and I was blown away by the depth. I almost went to college myself back in 1990, and I went straight pro. I should have played college tennis, Mitch. I definitely should have. And I played against some of the top college guys, a guy called Steve Bryan from University of Texas. I think he won NCAAs the one year. And the top few guys were good, but the depth is not like it is now. Tennis is an expensive game now. It's, relatively from when I was playing in those early days, you could play futures and break even quite comfortably. The cost of living isn't what it is now. And the prize money was, okay, you won a couple of matches, you more than paid for your hotel and your expenses. If you didn't have a coach, if you just, I didn't have a coach.
Yeah.
But now it's a different ballgame. 25, 30 years later, it's inflation. It's very expensive to travel. Hotels aren't what they used to be. Tennis is an expensive sport. So going to college is a great stepping stone. Get your level up. If you can't cut it at college tennis, it's tough to go pro. I would say, you'll find it difficult. But we've seen the upside of this is that the guys who are good at college are making that transition to the pro game pretty well, man.
It's way better and deeper now. Like, it is night and day this last decade specifically. And we're seeing a lot more of a path pro to college. And if worst case scenario is you go play college, you get an education, and that's a pretty good worst case scenario.
Yeah, and don't forget as well, they have the player pathways with wild cards. If you one of the top 10 players in college, you get X number of challenger wild cards, and if you're 11 to 20, there's also a facility there for you to get into some qualies. So I think that is a great venture between the challenger tour and the college system. It's really becoming. It's not quite like your sports in America, where it's the only pathway to like the NBA or playing baseball or NFL. It's become a good conduit though for tennis players now.
Yeah. Well, like we're seeing it with he won today. Alex Mickelson supposed to go to Georgia. I don't know if that's going to happen. he's
Father, you're good enough.
Yeah, but no, props to your son. You know, best of luck to Luke at Baylor, and it's got to be an exciting time for you to have this as a new ignition point for tennis as well. But Robbie Koenig, this was fun. Hope we get to do this again sometime. But it was a blast to finally have the interaction, talk some tennis, and cover the Wimbledon championships. Thanks so much for joining Tennis Channel Inside In.
Thanks for having me on the show, Mitch. Always a pleasure, bud.